I ran my own IPFS gateway, so you don't have to. Well, unless you really want to. Hey, my name's Steve and I'm with Pinata, and today we're going to show you how you can create your own IPFS gateway and make it public so anyone can use it if you really wanted to. Share it with your friends. This video is going to be following a blog post that we already did that has all these instructions written out. So if you get lost at any time, there's going to be a link for the blog post down below where you can reference any of the code snippets or commands that we're going to be running. You definitely will want to have some Linux experience, a good experience with the terminal and just knowing how to do certain things, such as moving in and out of directories, editing files through the terminal, things like that. Comes in very handy. And I will also put a warning out before I start this tutorial, is that when you make this IPFS gateway public, it is opening it up to abuse. And that is something unfortunate that happens a lot in the IPFS community. People find public gateways and then they just hammer them with requests. So keep that in mind. If you really want to take this to production and use it, you may want to look into ways that you can secure your gateway. But of course, we'll also show you some other options at the end. With that said, let's get started. All right, so the first thing you want to do is go ahead and go to DigitalOcean. There's a lot of cloud platforms you could use. This is just the one we're going to use for simplicity's sake. It is a paid one. I believe you could probably get like a free trial and not actually have to pay anything. I think that's how I got this one. But I think the droplet we're going to make is only $6 a month. It's pretty cheap. It's not going to give us perhaps the best performance or anything like that, but you know, we're just playing around. We don't want anything too crazy. So I have a basic project here. I'm going to click spin up a droplet. And from here, I can select any kind of location, data centers, etc., stuff like that. I'm just going to leave that all the same. New York City is fine. I'm just going to do standard Ubuntu. And this is where it kind of gets important as far as figuring out, you know, shared CPU versus dedicated, things like that. I'm keeping it basic. So do basic. And there's also different types of disk drives. So I'm just going to do regular, and I'm going to select this $6 a month plan. It's going to give us just 1 gigabyte of CPU, 25 gigabyte SSD, and 1 terabyte of bandwidth, which should be totally fine. We'll see. The next thing that you need to do is choose your authentication model. And you can choose between SSH key and password. I would recommend choosing SSH key. And it's really easy. I already have mine set up as a selection, but if you don't have one, you click new and have a place for you to paste it in if you don't know how to do it. They actually have several different ways of giving you instructions on how to do it. Makes it really, really easy. So I have mine put in there, got everything else in there. We'll give it a name, call it Public Gateway. That works. And just hit create droplet. And it's going to start spinning this up, and it is going to take a while to fully boot up. Okay, so now that it's created, we're actually going to do something that's a little annoying. We're going to turn it off. And the reason we're going to do that is because we want to enable IPv6, and that is going to help the connection and the connectivity of our gateway. So we're going to turn it off and then go to networking and click enable IPv6. And it's just going to take a second to do that. There we go. And we're going to turn the droplet back on. There we go. All right, so our droplet's back on. Our server is ready to go. We have our SSH key already stored in this particular droplet. So now we can SSH into it. So to do that, just go ahead and copy this IPv4 address. Generally, you don't necessarily want this information to be public. Or you may not want to just give it out freely. I'm not going to keep this droplet. I'm going to delete it so you guys cannot mess with it later. Just hold on to this, copy it, and we're going to SSH and go to our terminal now. All right, so we are in our terminal. I have a fresh one up and running. And so we copied that IP address earlier. We're going to do SSH root at the IPFS IP address. It's going to make sure, it's going to ask us, do we want to, do our fingerprint here? I'm going to say yes. And it's going to ask us to put in the phrase for, or passphrase for our RSA key. And there we go. If you log in, you should see something like this. And we are at root at public gateway, this thing that we just made. Now, first thing that we're going to do inside our server is actually create a user. And that's because we don't necessarily want to do everything in the root. It's not the most secure thing to do. And so we're going to make a new user. We're going to give it our same SSH key so we can log into it directly. And from there, we'll actually start installing some stuff.
So to do that, it's really easy. Just do add user, and I'm going to put in just my name, add user Steve. I'm going to create a password, and I can put in my name and just leave all this other stuff blank. Yes. And I've basically added myself into the system. Now we're going to do some modifications to the user. So we're going to do sudo user mod-ag. We're basically adding my user to the sudo group so we can do we have the right permissions to do everything we need to do for software installation. So now that we have our user added to the right group with permissions, we're also going to make a SSH folder and put authorized keys where we'll store our SSH key from our computer so we can log in there. So to do that, we're going to do make directory /home/steve/.ssh. And we're going to touch a file. We're going to make a file inside of there. So home steve/.ssh. I'm going to call it authorized keys. And we're going to do some permissions. We're going to do sudo chown-r steve/home steve.ssh. Don't forget the dot. And we're also going to do sudo chmod 700/home steve.ssh and sudo chmod 600 for the authorization file for authorized keys. There we go. All right, so we've got all of that information in there. Now we can actually go ahead and change into the user. So we're going to do su steve. And let's go ahead and cd into our root directory. So if we do print working directory, you can see we're in home Steve, right? And now we're actually going to edit the authorized key file. So you want to go ahead and copy your key to your clipboard, your public key. And what you want to do is either use Vim or Nano. I'm kind of a Vim person, so I'm just going to do Vim and do .ssh/authorized key. You can use Nano if you want to. And this is a blank file, so I'm going to go ahead and paste my public SSH key. I'm not going to show it to you right now, so be back in just a second. So basically, I've put my key in there and I saved and closed the file, and so it is all in there. And now we should actually be able to just SSH into that new user. So I can just do exit. I'm going to exit my session as Steve, and I'm also going to exit the node itself, and I've closed the connection. So now let's try SSH as Steve. Steve at 157.230.6.77. And I'm going to put in my passphrase just like I did before. And there we go. We are logged in as Steve in our SSH session for stuff. So now we can actually make some stuff. So before we install anything IPFS related, let's go ahead and update our system. We're going to do sudo apt update. And we're going to put in our password. And it's going to install some updates. So we'll wait for that to finish. And while this is running, you'll probably want to go ahead and go to the IPFS release website. It's on GitHub. There's going to be a list of all the different packages. There's going to be a link down below in the blog post of where you can locate this. And so depending on what operating system your server is running, you may need to download a different binary file. I already have the one I need, so I'm just going to copy and paste it in here. So for instance, the one I'm using is Kubo version 22, Linux, ARM 64. So I can do wget, and then from GitHub, the release zip file. All right, so it looks like that worked. If I list, you'll see there is the Kubo zip file. And so we need to unzip this. So we're gonna do tar-xf, and just start typing and hit tab so we don't have to type the whole thing out. And if that worked, we should now have a Kubo folder. So we can cd into Kubo. This is the Go implementation of IPFS, or an IPFS node. And if we look in here, we're going to see a install script. So very easy. We just run sudo /install-sh. And it's basically going to move that IPFS binary into our local bin so we can access it. And to make sure that it works, you want to just do IPFS --version. And if it's successful, you'll see the IPFS version 22. All right, so we have IPFS installed. It's up and running. Now we need to make it basically persist the entire time. We don't want to enter in the command manually to run the IPFS node every time we want it to run. We want it just to be running 24/7. So to do that, we're going to basically create a daemon that just runs 24/7 in the background under systemd and create an IPFS service that will run no matter how many times we're logging in, logging out, or if we shut down the node and restart it and reboot it back up, it's going to spin up IPFS automatically. So to do that, we can either use Vim or Nano to edit or create this file. So you will need sudo since it's kind of in a directory that is not usually touched. So we're going to do sudo vim, and then we're going to do /etc/systemd/user, and we're going to create a new file called ipfs.service. I'm going to open this up, and it's going to be empty, and we're going to paste a whole bunch of stuff in there, and you can find all of these code snippets in the blog post below, like I said. But essentially, we're creating a IPFS service that we can enable, and it will run this command when we want IPFS service to start. So I'm just going to go ahead and save and close that out. And now with that done, we can actually go ahead and spin up our service and spin up IPFS. So the first thing we need to do is going to do IPFS init, and we're going to do a profile of server. That's where we're running it. And we're also going to have designate the flag empty repo. All right, there we go. It says that it is initialized, has a pure identity. And now we're going to do systemctl user enable IPFS. And it's going to say it's created a symlink for our service. We're going to do systemctl user start IPFS. That's going to start it up. Systemctl user status. So let's just make sure that it's running. And there we go. That's the command, and it's showing that the daemon's running on these server endpoints and these IP addresses. And now we're also going to do one more command to make sure that it lingers beyond login. So even if I log out of my SSH session, I want this to keep running. And that's really easy. We're supposed to do login ctl enable linger, and then do $, all caps user. And there we go. We're all set to go. Now that you have all that running, let's actually try to download a file. Let's try to look at something through IPFS, through our IPFS node. Let's see how it goes. We're going to do curl-l, and we're going to use the localhost port 8080. This is where the gateway port is, and we're going to see if we can pull this file. There we go. Hello world from Pinata. How nice. And keep in mind, if you run this and it's a little bit slow and it doesn't work very well, it's mostly because this is a brand new IPFS node. It's fresh on the network. It hasn't had a lot of time to, gather content and connect with peers. So it might be really, really, really slow. So just be prepared for that. Now, this next step is if we want to set up the custom domain. So right here we have the blog post open running. I don't want to necessarily do this on camera and show you where domains and stuff are stored personally, but it's really simple. You basically get a domain from somewhere like Namecheap, or Google Domains kind of go out of business. There's a lot of other ones out there. GoDaddy is another one. You buy a domain, and we're basically going to set it up to be ipfs.domain.com is going to be our gateway domain in particular. And so in order to do that, you need to go to DigitalOcean, get your IP addresses, and essentially create these records in the DNS logs. So for instance, we have the IPv4, IPv6, copy those over, and you'll basically do, type A, IPFS, and then you put the IPv4 automatic, and just do that and follow this table. You should be good to go. And after you do that, definitely try the DNS checker to make sure it's working. All right, so we've got our DNS set up for our custom gateway. It's all pointing at our gateway. The only thing that has to happen now is that we actually have to make the gateway public to access it outside of the network of our server. Now, before we do this, I just want to make a very clear warning that this will make your IPFS gateway public and will allow people to use it that are maybe not inside your network. So doing this without any kind of protections in place or safeguards could cause some issues, could cause a lot of high usage from your DigitalOcean droplet or abuse. So research those things if you really want to take this to production. If you're just doing it for fun, might be okay, but just understand the risk is there, okay? So to make it open, we're basically going to copy this command from the blog post, and it's ipfs config addresses.gateway, and then we're just going to turn it to all zeros. Hit enter, and we're going to do one other change. We're going to do vim .ipfs/config. And we're going to basically open up the config for our IPFS node. And we're going to go down a little bit to public gateways. You can see here it's set to null right now. I'm going to backspace that out and basically create another object here. It's going to be probably a little messy in here because we're just doing it all raw here with them. And we're basically going to put in the domain. So my domain is going to be ipfs.penny.cloud. So we basically just do the top load. So penny.cloud is what we're going to do here. I'm going to create another object for this one. There it is. Let's find look for my cursor. Just try to keep this sort of neat. And in here, we're going to add two things. We're going to do use subdomains. Oops. Come on. And we're going to set that to true. And we're also going to add another thing here called paths. And this is going to be an array where we'll just use slash. I think we have to go down a line actually. So let's just do that. Slash IPFS. And then close the array up. And that should do it. So let's just go ahead and close and save this file. And now we have to basically restart our IPFS node with the new config. So we're going to do systemctl user restart IPFS. All right. If you don't see any error messages, you did it right. So now you can test this out basically with a link like http, no s, and then ipfs.penny.cloud/ and then port 8080. Still need to do that. We'll fix that later. /IPFS/ and then whatever CID you want. So here's CID. If you paste that into your browser, should work for you. And you should be able to pull it up. Might be really slow, but it is working. And just remember, keep in mind that we don't have HTTPS set up, but we will do that later. And the other thing that you'll notice here too is that we have to expose this 8080 port number. It's not really ideal. So we're going to install some stuff to kind of get rid of that. Okay. So to fix that, we're going to install Nginx. So we're going to do sudo apt install, and then do Nginx. I'm going to put in our password here. And that's going to go ahead and start downloading. Yes. There we go. And essentially with Nginx, we're going to create a proxy for our gateway so we don't have to use port numbers. And so you can paste this command in from the docs. I'm basically going to kind of make a backup of our default config for Nginx, just so we don't get rid of it. And then we're also going to do a new file, or just redo the default, and we're going to paste some stuff in. And so just copying, pasting from the docs here. So you can see here we're going to listen in on port 80, and we're going to have our name here. So let's just change this to penny.cloud. And that should all we have to do. Just save and close that. And then we need to do a restart of Nginx because it starts up after you install it. So systemctl restart Nginx. And we'll do a password here. There we go. And that should do the trick. So now we can actually try a link like this one, http ipfs.penny.cloud/IPFS, getting rid of the port number, and then pasting in your CID. I have a shortcut here for Penny. There you go. If you paste that into your browser, it should work, or anyone's browser for that matter. All right, so we're getting really close to wrapping this up. The last thing we're going to do is get a SSL certificate so we can do HTTPS, make it a little bit more secure. So we're going to do sudo snap install certbot, and we'll say -- classic, and it's going to take just a minute to download everything we need. All right, so we have it installed, and it's super easy to get this up and running. All you have to do is just do sudo certbot, and we'll do -- Nginx, and then -d with the domain that we're using. So ipfs.penny.cloud. And it's going to walk you through a few things and ask you a few questions. So you can put an email address. I'll do steve@penny.cloud. And hit yes. All right, and it's going to basically request a certificate, get it all set up. All right, so it is deployed, and there's one last step you have to do. If you look in the blog post below, you're going to see that you have to add one more DNS record to your DNS settings. It's a CAA record. You're putting IPFS and then doing let'sencrypt.org, so that certificate will work. So now you should be able to go to a website and do HTTPS IPFS any.cloud/IPFS and a CID. And that should pull up and it'll work. Very fun.
And there you have it. We built an IPFS gateway all ourselves on DigitalOcean with several lines of code. Well, several, I mean kind of a lot. But there's a lot more to consider whenever you're building something like this. As you probably could tell, one is speed. There's some things you can do to help increase the speed, such as enabling accelerated DHT client or finding providers that you can peer with. Sometimes that helps, but even then it can kind of struggle. On top of that, if it gets hit with abuse, then your usage is going to go way up. All that bandwidth limit that you have with DigitalOcean, all of a sudden you're going to have to start paying for bigger and bigger stuff. Gets a little out of hand if you're not careful. And on top of that, there's also a lot of files that shouldn't be shared on the internet, such as copyrighted material. And a lot of the time you're going to get requests if you run your own gateway to take that stuff down. And so with anything like this, you kind of have to ask yourself the question, is it worth my time? What do I want to do with this? If you're a Web3 developer building on top of IPFS, the chances are you probably don't have the time and the resources to build your own IPFS infrastructure. And that's why IPFS pinning services like Pinata exist. We make IPFS easy. We've been doing all the hard work of running IPFS infrastructure for years now. Having that down, making a reliable and fast service so you don't have to worry about your bills going up. You have special access controls to make sure that only you use your gateway if you want to fetch files outside your own account, and all sorts of other really nice things. So what are you waiting for? You can actually sign up at Pinata today. Just go to app.pinata.cloud. You get a free account and you'll get a dedicated gateway with your free account. You can try it out right now. It's really cool. With all that said, I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, feel free to drop them down below. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and we hope to see you again soon. Until next time, happy pinning.